you got to really submit to other people's way of seeing things, or a common way of seeing things, or specific ways of seeing things. And I think that makes a good salesperson.
Business of Architecture, episode 199. Hello, I'm Enoch Sears, and this is the podcast for architects, where you'll discover tips, strategies, and secrets for running a profitable and impactful architecture practice. I'd like to invite you to discover how to double your architecture firm income and create your dream practice of freedom and impact by downloading my free 4-part architecture firm profit map. As a podcast listener, you can get instant access by going to freearchitectgift.com. Today's podcast is sponsored by AIA Advantage partner BQE Software, the makers of ArchiOffice. ArchiOffice is the only office and project management software designed specifically for architects. It helps you manage people and projects while you focus on designing great architecture. So whether you're working remotely or on-site, ArchiOffice allows you to monitor the status of your projects and tasks and send out invoices in an accurate and timely manner. Get your fully functional 15-day trial of ArchiOffice by going to businessofarchitecture.com/demo.
Hello and welcome. My name's Rion Willard and I'm here with the Business of Architecture in the UK, and I'm sitting with my good friend Seán McAlister, who is the co-founder and director of Seán and Stephen, which is a unique practice based here in East London. They've worked on an amazing set of diverse projects, from street frontage, landscaping, civic work, public artworks, to exhibition designs, working with clients like the Museum of London. And I've also got a good healthy stream of private residential projects. And you've also recently just won the Crisp Street Exchange project in Poplar, which is a shared co-working affordable desk space. And it's a great pleasure to be able to speak with you, Seán. And I'd just like to know, what was it? How did you guys get started?
Thanks, Ryan. Stephen Mackie and I, Stephen Mackie's not here at the minute. Stephen Mackie and I studied together in Dundee University. I come from Belfast, but I came over, and Stephen's from Edinburgh. And we got on well, we had a bit of a drinking culture, but we shared a lot of aesthetics and, extracurricular architectural study interests. And so we came down to London, worked for a few years separately, and then realised that we wanted to work together. We tried our hand at a competition that was publicly, it was open to the public, and it was an invitation to tender for some work up in Walthamstow, which is an area in the northeast of London. And the work was to design shop fronts and build the shop fronts for about, I can't remember, but maybe about like 20 shops, and you'd be given a handful of them amongst other designers. So it came at an opportune time where both Stephen and I were let off by our respective employers for one reason or another. And
this is often the best way to start a practice, I think.
It's momentum. You need momentum for sure. It's hard to dedicate the time to thinking about a whole new entity. At the end of the day after work, you kind of need to clear the deck sometimes. Yeah. And that's what. If we didn't win that competition, we might have tried other competitions, but we won that competition. And while it wasn't a major money spinner in any respect, we lost a lot of money, in terms of time. But it gave us the portfolio to then seek more work. And so from very humble beginnings, we got a £50,000 contract after that, based on the quality of our design work and the management of the clients.
And when was this? This was
2013.
Right.
2012 we won the competition, and then 2013 we were delivering the competition, the projects, the shop fronts. There was a Chinese takeaway restaurant where we had communication issues, but we had to work with visuals quite a lot with them, and then a youth space which is daycare centre that's up in Walthamstow, and they just had no street frontage at all. It was an old an old building that there was nowhere to advertise anything or to say come in, no welcoming sign. So our job was to help them have an image on the street without it being kitsch.
Yeah. And how did you find that transition from going from like working in a corporate practice to suddenly being out there delivering, quite a public piece of work with you and Stephen? What was the sort of transition that you went through, like in like just learning to deal with the mechanics of running a business and dealing with all the unknowns of where the next new bits of work were going to come from? And what kind of strategies did you employ, or was it sort of?
Yeah, no, good question. When I think back, if I think back quickly, it just feels like we ended one employment and then moved on to working for our own practice, but that wasn't the case really. While we were trying to find more and more work, Stephen and I were both trying to earn money elsewhere, and that happened for about 8 months. We were seeking. I worked as a gallery technician in an art gallery on a very informal basis, but basically I was screwing things into asbestos for acrobats to hang off or to hang up artworks, or screwing projectors, as any gallery technician knows best how to do.
Yeah. And
so I'd be filling my time with the competitions that we won, and the work that came in. And then the other time would be on this. But in reality, we were having these fundamental conversations and sometimes arguments between us about what constitutes getting paid whenever you earn the money and you're in control of the contract. Is it for every hour that you work, you should give yourself a set hourly rate? But what if you've not calculated how many hours it takes to carry out that design work? We also had to manage not only a client who was giving the money for example, the Chinese takeaway, but also we had to manage the people inside the Chinese takeaway whose English was non-existent. So there was a sort of a triangle.
Just to sort of explain for people who may be listening in the States, for example, what these redevelopment projects are.
Yep, quite right. There has been a bit of a swell of support, especially in London, but I'm sure in other cities and towns, where the high street has been identified as an asset to towns, where hubs, it's a hub of thriving commerce, of footfall, of the day-to-day life of any town or city. So central governments and local authorities have been finding funding and finding ways to spend money to improve the experience of being in a high street. That might be about better signage, about better lighting, better pavements, better street fronts. And so one of the outputs of this, and there are many, one of them is putting up competitions for designers, of many designers, to design individual shop fronts, so that you don't get big swathes of singular languaged boulevards,
right,
where the sort of the breakdown of a street isn't homogenized too much.
Yeah.
Because we're trying to protect that as well. We're trying to protect the individuality of each shop owner.
Yeah.
However, often that's not a care for the shop owner, which is a funny contradiction.
Yeah. And I suppose those kind of projects as well, it's in the public domain, so it's quite.
Yeah. It's very much so. You get a lot of conversation when you're on the street front, up a ladder, screwing up a sign like you had CNC cut and you'd been painting for the last few days for pittance, and you'll have every Tom, Dick and Harry come along and give their 2 cents on the typeface you use, the colours, whether it should have been gloss or satin paint, this sort of thing, or if you're using vinyls or changing a door or this sort of thing. You'll get a lot of instant polling. Yeah, and it seems to never be in one direction. Very diverse. And I think it's worth noting that in a place like Walthamstow, there is a very diverse community. There isn't very difficult to say there's there's a majority population or demographic there. And so not only that, but I think it's true in terms of like political sway, aesthetics, and just sensibilities, job types. So you really do get a broad spectrum of shop types, but also people coming to comment on it.
And so this project, once you had that kind of completed, and did that become like a sort of a calling card for you? You won more work off the back of that, or were you still doing the more, the routes of kind of competition entries? Because I know that you've done a lot of interesting sort of public artworks, which are kind of, they're fascinating conversation pieces right in the centre of, of towns and boroughs across London.
Yeah, so that's absolutely right. We didn't mean to pick this entry point into becoming businessmen in architecture or business people or designers. We didn't mean for that to be our entry niche, but that's what happened. So we did well at these high street regeneration projects. That it kind of snowballed where we won more projects, larger projects with the local council, presumably because they were reasonably happy with the work that we were doing. And it started to become more permanent. So for the same, for Walthamstow, we designed essentially a cinema signpost in their town centre, but also became a marker as a rear projection, a rear lit white cube on Core 10 tripod legs, really quite tall. It looks a bit like an alien spaceship that came and landed in. And I think it's because of this installation type portfolio that we were starting to grow that we were able to enter competitions. For example, with the Museum of London, where we entered that along with Noy Architects. We collaborated with them as designers in that tender, and who we share workspace with. Yeah. So we share a lot of conversations about business and design. So our portfolio looked really strong, I believe, to them, and our language was there. We knew how to make things, because we were having to make things with these small budgets up in Walthamstow. I think that knowledge transferred into the tender process. And we were able to talk with fabricators quite a lot, because unlike normal building architecture where you've got contractors and everything's quite permanent, fabricator can be used in these more temporary situations. So that is one thread of our business. But if we were to keep on at that, I think we might have had to take a huge, maybe a pause in our business for a while we tried to work out how to continue a stream or grow this amount. They didn't pay quite a lot, and we were quite aware that a lot of our experience in private residential design and other parts of architectural design were not necessarily going to waste, but the profit that we could be making with those and the experience we could be developing, especially with client relationships, wasn't happening through the installation type work. Yeah. So almost the whole time that we've been doing installation work, we've also had a stream of private residential. And now it's kind of interesting. What's happening now is we're identifying the private residential as our core business market. Yeah. And we're trying to find, either consciously or subconsciously, we're trying to find a bit of that installation coming into private residential. I think we don't want to waste any of this experience, and that's a hard thing to do, because you have to marry a good salesperson technique along with the right clients.
This is what I always enjoyed talking with you, because you've got a very good aptitude for understanding how to be a salesperson, how to communicate to the language of a client, and how to sort of make your ideas, your architectural ideas, palatable and something that's kind of digestible, which is perceived as something very valuable for your clients. How have you gone about doing that? What sorts of
There's many different client types, aren't there? You can't. And there's many different people who are stakeholders who somehow feel like clients but are not your client. And so you have to have these different type of respect and these combinations of respect and empathy, and like you say, I think there's a certain amount of navigating the language you use with different types of people and different types of enthusiasm. I think everyone could recognize that if you have a corporate client stakeholder who's a project manager for many years, they're going to feel patronized if you try and walk them through a project. I say teach, that wasn't a slip. I think that's kind of what you do with private residential clients who have no experience in architecture.
Yeah.
And
exactly. Yeah, there's the element of educating the client, which kind of
massive education element. And I've had a lot of conversations with other business owners, architect business owners, and a lot of people say that it's that very thing that drains quite a lot of the profit from the business, because you're dealing with anxieties. I mean, major anxieties with private residential clients. Not all of them, but often, especially with the more modest projects that we do, where £100,000 is the absolute limit that they could ever raise, and I'm there to arrive at the realization that maybe only gets them their loft and not the basement that they were hoping for. Of course not, but you have to somehow get them enthused nonetheless.
Yeah.
So I guess my point is I'm much more, it's probably not good for me, but I'm much more interested in trying to find clever ways of helping the private residential clients teach them what they need to know in order for them to enjoy the process and drop the anxiety, and of course shape their expectations in as sympathetic a way as possible. Yeah, because it can be rather jarring and disappointing whenever the people's hopes are usually higher than the reality the money allows them to achieve. So
yeah,
that's in terms of size, but of course then there's quality.
And how do you go about educating your clients? Do you do that through sort of printed literature material? Is it just a question of the relationship that you're cultivating with them?
Well,
or is it something that you do before they even become your client? Like you have sort of educational material put out there? I
don't want to show all my cards, Ryan, but you and I have had a couple of conversations about this, and I'm really interested actually in how you are developing a sort of rapport with your clients. And it's not in some ways this kind of feels like it's a discussion about manipulation, but it really is about preparation. With my clients, Stephen and I are slowly building up a library of literature. So one of the things is we've found examples in books that have analysed past typical projects of similar nature. Let's say someone's house extension, what have you, very modest. And there's a pie chart that breaks down where the costs lie. And so this pie chart is so important to us because it shows that a printed literature, we're not making this up to the client. The client knows that this is beyond us.
Yeah.
And we're showing them, and it says that the construction budget, which they thought was their total budget in some way, some shape and form, is maybe a third of the graph. Then you have about a quarter of the graph is the VAT, the value-added tax. And then the rest of it is loose furniture design, fees, and so on. It just gets nibbled away. And so one of the first things that we try and do, I'm talking about managing expectations, is we're trying to say to them, the numbers you've been thinking about, you need to loosen up that's not set in stone. And you need to you probably need to clip your ideas about what you can achieve with this number. And we're not saying these words, but we're showing them a graph that kind of gently lets them come to that realization, because we don't ask, at this point, we're not asking them what their budget is, although we might have at this stage. Then another thing that we do, because two of the big things are time and money. So we looked at the money to some extent, and then we look at time, and we've got a similar printed timeline of a typical project that is atypical, let's be honest, just like the pie graph was atypical, but there is still an external source provided to the client that shows that their timeline is actually rather long. So you got a bar chart, if you like, stacked bar chart, and then if you look at it, it says that it's only the second half or the last third is the construction phase, and the rest of it above it is design phase. And, you know, that is a big reality nugget for a client to chew on.
Yeah.
This idea that, we can't go on site next week, that's the sort of the dream. And even some corporate clients or public clients have to be managed like that, although generally speaking, they've got experience in managing, in knowing how to build in contingencies and times. Yeah. So there's two examples.
And how do clients find you? So that's kind of explaining how you nurture the relationship. I'm imagining those kinds of materials you give out to prospective clients, or you give out to people that have already, you've got a formal contract with. But how do people enter into those agreements with you in the first? How do people find you? How do you sort of cast your net? Or how have you been doing that?
Well,
particularly in the sort of private residential world, because it seems quite different from the competition strategies.
We have, I think, I'm getting from all my conversations that I'm having with other business leaders, different business people who've got their own architecture practice in private residential. I'm finding everyone's got a different story.
Yeah.
But the common element is referrals, and for us that is very strong. With, for example, we did a very small extension for a home up in Walthamstow. We didn't carry it through into construction, but we got it to the stage where the contractor could build it. And the client was just so happy, even though this was perhaps one of our most modest projects. The client was so happy that she, without our awareness, she went and said nice things to other clients, to her friends, and their friends then spoke to other friends, and they came back to us where some other people wanted work with us simply on the basis of the happiness of that one client. In some ways, that tells a really sharp story about what makes for a good referral is, very simply a happy client. The sum at the end of the day, what is the net emotional response a client has, and that should be protected. I think architects should, take their head out of their arse sometimes and really just kind of protect
totally.
that.
Do you ever have a system in place where you kind of formally ask clients for referrals, or you have that as part of a sort of strategic part of a conversation? Because often, I know for myself, when I first started practice, I just kind of let referrals happen. Now I have more of a system in place where I monthly communicate with clients, my existing client base, through videos or through a telephone conversation, where I actually just formally ask, here's how can I help other people like you? You've been one of my sort of most prized clients. I want more.
Well, that's right. Yeah. We don't have formal systems in place yet, although we're aware that would probably be a good idea.
Yeah.
The formality that we've had in the past has been to you got to target your clients. I'm not going to sit here and say that every single one of our clients are people who would want to have referrals from, and I don't mean that in a terrible way. It's just that I'm trying to shape a business with my business partner, and there's some projects we do that we wish were bigger or that had more financial clout behind it and so on. So you target your client, you ask for more you let them know that you've got space coming up, or that you're available to do more work, and see if you can find the positives in the project that they're happy to probably propagate. But we haven't been pushing that too hard, no, Ryan.
Cool.
Not recently.
A couple of things I wanted to talk about with you. One is to ask you the question of what have been your sort of the biggest obstacles that you've faced in the last few years of running a business, and how you've resolved them or resolving them. And the other is I wanted to talk a little bit about, you've always been one of these people in the architectural scene in London particularly, where you've been at the beginning of lots of events. You've created events, you've created architectural magazines like Mackie, which you produced, and it was a very good way of sort of disseminating your sort of take on things, but also being like the beginnings of being an industry leader. And how has that kind of come through into your business? And is it something that you still do, or?
Highly flattering, Brian. Highly flattering. No, you're right. So,
but it's true, because I always think of you might not have realised it, but actually, putting those events on, and you've got 100 people there, all from it's suddenly like, wow, and it's inspiring.
These things are like exercise. They make you feel really good when you're doing them. You know their value, but you need to keep on doing them. So Mackie, the small architectural magazine, amongst me and people that we know, it's open to the public to contribute to, although it's on a bit of a hiatus just now. We're in the process of making what is effectively a magazine in the office.
Brilliant.
For potentially clients, but maybe it's about talking between the employees. There's only 3 of us, but sometimes you got to share your inner thoughts that you can't express at work. The designs that you're exploring, or what have you. But it also shows the client a bit like we were speaking earlier about We Made That and how they make a newspaper. And they disseminate that around their local area in Whitechapel. We have a similar desire to do that in our local area, or maybe just with our contacts. The other thing is really just like getting people in a room that might not normally do that. So we used to have these nights that were very similar to Pecha Kucha. I'm sure a lot of your listeners will know what that is.
Yeah.
But where we'd just get the local designers in proximity and invite them to our studio, get a screen, and just invite maybe 2 or 3 of them to give a talk, have some drinks. And all of a sudden you know about the rendering firm that are just down the corridor that are run by architects, and you're like, but they've kind of changed cloaks, but they're business people as well, and they're fascinating stories, and they're working with big architects, or you find illustrators and so on. It's really diverse, and I think that's part of the key. It's always about breaking out of your frame of mind and trying to enrich your practice at the same time. So they're to keep happening, but they've been slow at the minute. So those types of things, I can't think of anything else at the minute.
Cool. And the other question was about the biggest sort of obstacles and challenges that you've faced running a business, and how you've overcome them.
Ooh, that's a tough one. That's in danger of getting too deep, Brian. If we go down that too heavily, but I would say that what's in common with a lot of people who start practices is this discussion of strain, of a type of emotional strain, and part of it's doubt and the questioning of the foundations of what you're doing, especially whenever relationships are frayed, or work is slow to come in, or there's a puzzle in front of you and you feel like you've tried every angle to solve it, and you feel like the last opportunity to solve it is by folding it and putting it in a box and,
Yeah.
and running away from that box, maybe setting the box on fire. And so I think I'd say for me, trying to find what it was that I loved about university study in aesthetics and the study of experience of space, like naturally that, I think a lot of us who bloomed when we were doing our masters, I think many architect or master's degree or diploma or whatever the equivalent is in America, whenever you bloom in that, sometimes you kind of, well, for me, I want to remember what it was that really opened my eyes to design. And I found it difficult to sell that, or like to make that in something that our practice could use. One of the problems of that is it's very me and it's not us, And there's a problem between when you work with another architect as well. Maybe it's the same with being your own architect. You don't feel like the company should take on your aesthetics too heavily. That sounds nonsense. But it's very difficult to find a homogeneous or a sort of halfway house aesthetic sometimes. And for me, on a non-trivial level, that's been a difficult thing. The question is, do I need the company to exhibit my deep interests, or is this a business opportunity that it can be independent of that? And then if it's the latter, I have to ask myself, is that satisfying?
Yeah. Well, that is an obstacle, and that's the conflict. I mean, I've dealt with that myself. It's this kind of constantly wanting to express my own sort of niche ideas, but then also how to communicate that to a marketplace, and also if there was someone else, if you're working with a team, how everyone creates the same unified vision together. And obviously when you as you're developing, ideas are changing, and you're getting deeper into what it is that you want to do and how to
But I think I'm finding like all of these things, when you stop the stress and you walk away from it, I think some of the solutions come to the foreground. And I think I've answered this question myself, and it's just at the stage of get on and do it. The answer is be the salesperson. And that sounds like a horrible thing for an architect to kind of say, especially when we're talking about like artistic endeavor. But I think you need to find a way of selling it to not just clients, of course, like especially clients, but you just sell it to your colleagues.
Yeah.
You just sell it to other architects.
Totally.
Because that's your test market in some way.
I think you've hit the nail on the head there. I mean, that's the conflict that certainly as an architect, as a business person, that we never want to identify as being salesperson. But actually, being a salesperson is the fundamental skill of being an architect. It's just that we have to redefine what it means to be a salesperson, right? You've got this sort of negative imagery of a salesperson being a cold calling somebody trying to flog you, mops at your door or whatever. Yeah. But actually, salesmanship is about communication. It's about articulating your own ideas, and also pinpointing your interests and passions into the needs of your market. And also, every conversation we're having is a form of sales. With our own teams, with our clients, with our, with the consultants that we're working with the planning department. There is this element of salesmanship that goes with it, and it is the sort of the key ingredient.
Well, that's right. You can't just be, I guess it's a can of worms, isn't it? Because you can't just be the salesperson. At the end of the day, to know the marketability of the thing that you're selling, it requires a bit of stepping back and a bit of observation, working out what triggers attraction and happiness in people, and actually, and trying to communicate with that language, and I think that's where the trick lies. If you have a difficult idea, it's got value. You need to find out how other people communicate and communicate in their terms. And it's kind of humbling in a way, because you have to say, well, you know, the way that you've been talking about this is kind of all upside down and inside out. There might be something in the idea, but it's not on your terms. And so, yeah, there's something interesting about that. You've got to really submit to other people's way of seeing things, or a common way of seeing things, or specific ways of seeing things. And I think that makes a good salesperson.
Yeah, totally. Brilliant. Thank you so much for your time, Seán. It's always an absolute pleasure to speak with you. I look forward to seeing exciting, passionate things that you engage with.
Thank you, Ryan.
And that is a wrap. Thank you for listening today. If you're looking for more time, freedom, impact, and income as an architect, get instant access to my free 4-part architect profit map by visiting freearchitectgift.com. Today's podcast is sponsored by AIA Advantage partner BQE Software, the makers of ArchiOffice. ArchiOffice is the only office and project management software designed specifically for architects. It helps you manage people and projects while you focus on designing great architecture. So whether you're working remotely or on-site, ArchiOffice allows you to monitor the status of your projects and tasks and send out invoices in an accurate and timely manner. Get your fully functional 15-day trial of ArchiOffice by going to businessofarchitecture.com/demo. The views expressed on the show by my guests do not represent those of the host, and I make no representation, promise, guarantee, pledge, warranty, contract, bond, or commitment except to help you conquer the world.